That's what terrifies the super rich more than anything else, that the peasants will figure out that the aristocracy is basically harvesting them and has made them slaves, and they'll grab their pitchforks and head to the castle. There's a kind of political/financial French Revolution scenario that is terrifying to the billionaire class. It seems like we're not that far from something like that.
This is Kaiser Johnson with our specials for the week of Cyber Monday from November 27th through December 4th, 2023, while supplies last. First, we feature 1/10 ounce gold eagles at $32 over melt with a minimum of 5 coins. Next, silver Nordic Mint 5-ounce bars at just $1.99 over spot per ounce with a minimum purchase of 10 bars. We also have 1-ounce silver 2023 Britannia at $2.69 over spot when you order 50 or more coins. And finally, Dealer's Choice silver 10-ounce bars are just $1.49 over spot per ounce with a minimum of 4 bars. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you. Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're always privileged to have this returning guest. John Rubino has a Substack channel we're going to hear more about. He is the founder of DollarCollapse.com, and he joins us today, Monday, November 27th, 2023. John, thanks for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
Hey, Doug, again, thanks for having me back.
You've written an article just today about the coming 2024 real estate collapse, and that's of great concern to many of our viewers. The demographic of our viewers is typically later career stage and retirement age. A lot of people are counting on their real estate that they own as a major portion of their wealth. And they've one of the things that they've considered paid off. Others who have been trying to relocate, perhaps strategically, are concerned about the lack of affordability in some areas of the country. And if you could kind of give us insight into what you've been researching about the real estate market. It was part of what has been called the bubble of everything, of stocks, bonds, and real estates for the past decade or so. And maybe you can bring us up to date on what we need to know about what you're seeing looking ahead in the real estate market.
Yeah, we basically, it kind of got lost in the everything bubble because so many other things were going up that we didn't pay that much attention to real estate the way we would have if that was the only bubble that was blowing up. But we basically had the biggest real estate bubble in American history in the last 10 years because we pushed interest rates down to such unnaturally low levels that made houses relatively cheap when you finance them. And so a lot of people bought houses at higher and higher prices, and a lot of new players jumped into the market at the same time. We had private equity groups going in and buying entire neighborhoods with 0% money because they had access to such cheap capital, and then converting those houses into rentals. And then we had Airbnb entrepreneurs, which is a new thing in the last 10 years. It used to be with Airbnb, you rent out, the spare bedroom or something like that, or the guest house. Well, a lot of people got the idea that they could build an empire by buying houses and then Airbnb-ing them at very high rates and using the cash flow to buy more property. So they got deeply into that enough so that there are a lot of people out there that own 20, 30 houses. So you've got a massive amount of inventory in the hands of people that really that aren't in for the long haul, probably. These private equity guys are just going to cut and run whenever the time comes. So we've created the conditions in which, now that we're raising interest rates and houses are completely unaffordable for regular people because you take today's prices and finance it at these new higher mortgage rates, and you get monthly costs that are just unmanageable for the vast majority of people. So you've got conditions in which there aren't that many buyers out there, but there's potentially a lot of sellers. When the Airbnb guys, and they're finding this out now, Airbnb doesn't really work as a business model like it used to. So these houses aren't nearly as profitable as they were thought to be. And a lot of Airbnb entrepreneurs are not making enough money to cover their costs. They're going to have to start dumping this inventory. That's coming. The private equity guys are just, they're Wall Streeters. As soon as the market turns, they bail. And that's coming too. And meanwhile, the home builders bought a lot of raw land in the really booming part of the bubble. And now they don't have any choice. They have to build on that land because they've got to carry it regardless. So a ton of new houses are basically going up on spec. So you add that all up, and 2024 is looking like a year in which this current shortage of homes for sale turns into a glut in a very big way. And prices have to go down dramatically to convince anybody to buy any of those houses that are coming on the market. So we're going to see a 30, 40% decrease in home prices and a lot of losses across the market. A lot of entities that are involved in the real estate market are going to go bankrupt. So in other words, a typical housing bust, only with bigger numbers and much further to fall. So yeah, that's one aspect of the everything bubble blowing up in 2024. And normally that would be enough to give us a recession, but it's one of like 5 things that are liable to blow up going forward. But it's the most obvious one right now.
One of the things, I guess, if we could take those maybe one at a time, you mentioned about private equity firms. We interviewed Alex Newman from the New American and Epoch Times contributor. He talked about BlackRock, the masters of the universe, and how BlackRock got this sweetheart deal with the government to have access to obscene amounts of capital at extremely low rates, and actually guiding or using the power of capital that they're managing for mom and pops who in their 401ks and everything else to basically do a lot of this real estate buy-up, and without any kind of justice or taking a role of responsibility in those markets in which they became dominant players. Do you have any further thoughts about that phenomenon of basically, whether you call it collusion or whatever, between government and private equity firms that are part of this takeover of the ownership of everything? And I want to connect that in your mind, if you would, with one other thought. Carol Roth, the author that we interviewed a couple weeks ago on You Will Own Nothing, author of the book You Will Own Nothing, talks about that phenomenon of that Klaus Schwab and the WEF have been purporting, of saying, don't worry, the future is bright. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. But how is this phenomenon of the baby boomers' retirement funds being used by equity firms like BlackRock to buy up all of the real estate, and meanwhile, the baby boomers the millennials and beyond seem that they can't find housing that's affordable. How has this phenomenon developed in your view? Do you see it as something that we aren't being educated enough about what's actually happening?
Well, as far as housing goes, we've basically ruined the lives, or at least impaired the lives of our kids and grandkids. The baby boomer generation did. So I'm taking personal blame for this. I apologize on behalf of my generation, but basically we've left our kids and grandkids with a world in which the normal rites of passage to adulthood just aren't there anymore. It used to be that, if you were making decent money at the age of 26, you could actually buy a reasonably nice house. I remember it being like that back in the day, but it's not that way for millennials right now. They look at the house that their mom and dad bought as a starter 20 or 30 years ago for $90,000, and it's now $450 if you're lucky, if you can get a cheap mortgage. And so there's no way they can do the things that their parents did. And same thing with jobs. It used to be that, using me as an example again, I needed a summer job one time, and I just drove over to a factory that works with metal on the edge of town, and said, "Hey, do you need anybody?" And they said, "Yeah, come on in." And I joined the United Auto Workers Union in doing that, and was making adult money for a job that I just walked up and asked about. Now, there's nothing like that available for today's 18, 19, 20-year-olds. What they get offered is unpaid internships that don't actually lead anywhere, and so you got massive numbers of young people right now trying to cobble together 3 part-time jobs into something that pays $12 an hour over 40 hours each week. And you can't live a life on that kind of money, or at least you can't progress in life. You can live a life where you have a couple of roommates, an old junky car, and you don't eat out, and you basically, you pay your Obamacare insurance, and you pay your car upkeep, and you pay your rent, and that's your life. And you can keep that as long as you want to, but you can never progress beyond it. That's the situation of a lot of kids right now. So we're creating an environment, first of all, that is going to be politically really chaotic. Second of all, is going to lead to a lot of civil unrest, of course, because when you have nothing left to lose, as Gerald Celente likes to say, you lose it. We're creating those kinds of conditions. And it might be part of a master plan on the part of the World Economic Forum and the rest of the big giant entities out there that control the financial system, to put us in that position, or put kids in that position, so that they're so desperate for any kind of help that they obey the government, because the government is the source of the help that they desperately need. Could be true. But I will say that when you make interest rates unnaturally low, you automatically lead to the creation of big, giant, powerful financial companies, because the companies that can borrow money at the lowest interest rate can then put that money to work in ways that help them grow. And if you make interest rates zero or negative, you basically turbocharge the growth of these big financial entities, and you get what we have today. BlackRock and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase. Basically own so much of the financial system that it's the same thing as saying they own the major corporations. If you as an investment company own a huge chunk of IBM stock, and you're able to vote that stock in ways that you want to vote, then you basically have control over the board of directors and the policies of that company. So we're seeing something like that happen, where governments in monstrously large financial companies get together, and between them have control over a lot of the big corporations there. So yeah, we're headed towards a system that is definitely not capitalism and has a lot of the hallmarks of fascism. And we're headed that way pretty quickly.
Another element of that I think you brushed up against, but I don't think we really hit it as hard as I'd like to, is the concept of that these companies, because they had this almost limitless access to capital, didn't have to be subject to the retail mortgage rates that are now rising and rising. So you have this dichotomy, this discrepancy between these enormous institutional buyers who can just come in and be cash buyers, versus the ordinary, whether the millennials or whether it's people that want to relocate or whatever, who are looking at, they're looking at mortgage rates now and saying, we can't afford anything that's currently out there. So can you address that phenomenon as part of this unfairness and perhaps unsustainableness that's corrosive to our society, of making the ordinary person finding housing unaffordable, whereas these huge corporations can snap stuff up by being cash buyers?
Yeah, if you're a big hedge fund or a private equity company, or at least very recently, you could borrow money pretty close to 0%. In other words, you had free money to play with. So you could go into a neighborhood and you could use that free money to buy up houses at prices that were, say, 20% above market. And the original prices, the market prices, were already out of the reach of people who have to take out a mortgage for 4, 5, 6, 7%. And who don't make enough money in the first place to save up for a down payment. So you're in an unbeatable position if you're Blackstone, a private equity company that's doing this in real estate. And then so you buy up all these houses, and then you convert them to rentals. And the people who were unable to buy houses have to live somewhere. So they have no choice but to pay the rents that you're charging. So you jack up the rents. So you basically push people out of the home ownership segment of society. You bring them into the rental segment, and then you jack up the rents on them, and there's nothing they can do about it. So that's basically the system as it's playing out now. Now, the one bit of poetic justice that I think we're going to see pretty soon is a lot of these big hedge funds and private equity companies losing a ton of money on the houses they bought at 20% over market 2 years ago, and are now dropping to 30, 40, 50% below that price. So there's a decent chance that a lot of these guys go bankrupt, just as most of the big banks would have in 2008, 2009, if the government didn't bail them out. So watch for that as part of the real estate bust. You'll see home prices start to drop, And before they become cheap for the rest of us to buy, you'll see a lot of the companies that bought at the very top of the market get into trouble. You'll see a lot of Airbnb entrepreneurs and a lot of hedge funds start reporting, and a lot of probably banks that are involved in the lending for all of this stuff. So you'll see those entities start to get into trouble. And then the question is, will the government step in and bail them out? And that's when things get interesting, because, if it's Airbnb entrepreneurs and if it's hedge funds, maybe they don't bail them out. And we get some really high profile bankruptcies, which I think would be the best possible thing. Capitalism needs big bankruptcies to show everybody else what not to do. And when you bail everybody out who gets into trouble, you take away that learning experience for the rest of the market, because nobody pays any kind of a price. So we need companies to pay prices for bad decisions. And I think there's a decent chance in 2024 that we see some of that.
It's a great concern. I think you're now getting into an arena that I think is very important, and that's this idea of suspension of natural law. The idea that there are no consequences to reckless and destructive decisions. We saw through the BLM riots and everything of the last 3 years or 4 years, police being ordered by major city mayors to stand down. This call to defund the police. We had some very famous politicians pounding the table in Washington saying, burn it all down, burn it all down. This idea that you can disobey civil law, that you can disobey natural law, that you can do things that are violent and destructive of other people's properties. You can do snatch and grab, looting. You can do all kinds of things, form autonomous zones and all of that in the name, and it being officially sanctioned and encouraged as something this is the way our society is going to be now. And where does that lead us? And you look at the highest levels, both in government and in business, and you see what people think there's no natural recourse of law, no consequences. If you reach a certain level, you break through this glass ceiling and now you're just untouchable. You can do anything. And that's of grave concern to ordinary people who have lived their whole lives trying to follow the rules, trying to do the right thing. And now they're finding that they're bearing the punishment for others. And meanwhile, the whole society is degraded to a point where lawlessness becomes the norm. Open borders, there's no order there, that sort of thing. Where do you see, if you look at the big picture of how this affects our society and where we're going, where do you see this abandonment of the rule of law changing the nature of, generationally perhaps, of our country? And what do you think we need to do about that?
Well, yeah, either laws apply to everybody or there is no law, right? And that's kind of the situation that we've created with the things that you named. It used to be that you had to get in line and fill out the forms and wait in order to become an immigrant into the United States. Now you just show up. They bring you across the border and they cut you loose, and and then a lot of states that you end up in will let you vote. So that's changed dramatically. Corporations, that's right. We have socialism for big companies and rugged individualism for individuals, where if you and I go bankrupt, somebody comes along and takes all our stuff. Goldman Sachs goes bankrupt. They get a bailout and then they pay their bankers record bonuses at the end of the year. So yes, that's, and the rioting thing, this January 6th thing is astounding, where, vastly more violence, vastly more people were hurt, vastly more property was destroyed during the BLM Antifa riots. And then you get this thing that they're calling an insurrection that was barely anything at the Capitol, but it was Trump supporters. So they're putting them in jail for 15 or 20 years each. People see that, people recognize that the laws do not apply across the board in an equal way anymore. And see, one of the nice things about states is that we can vote with our feet and our pocketbooks if we don't like the policies of the place that we live. And we're seeing that happen. There's a deluge of people leaving California, rightfully so. California is turning into a hellscape right now. They're leaving New York and they're leaving Illinois, where Chicago is. And they're moving to places where the stuff that you just talked about does not apply, where the laws are more or less spread equally and applied equally to everybody who lives there, and contracts still count. And they would, if they could, close the borders and get immigration under control. Well, we're seeing people move from states that basically don't take the law seriously to states that do take the law seriously. Now, the question becomes, will the people who leave the lawless states bring the attitudes of those lawless states with them when they go to Florida or Texas or wherever? Or are they the ones who are rational and they're leaving to find a place that is run well, and they'll appreciate it and vote for those policies once they get to their new home? We'll have to see how that goes. It might be a mixed bag, or it might be one or the other. And that's something we'll find out over the next few years during the next few big elections. But I think the states that are run the way California and New York and Illinois are run are going to be bankrupted by the results of their policies pretty soon. Whereas Florida and Texas and a few other states are going to be running big surpluses and welcoming more and more people in all the time and have very low crime rates and all that. So the differences are only going to get more and more dramatic as long as the policies in the more or less lawless states stay in place. So I think that's one of those things that could be fixed by the system, by free individuals making choices, and we'll have to see. But I think the underlying ideas that led to the policies that govern immigration and shoplifting and violent protests, those ideas still exist out there. And to the extent that they're put into place anywhere, you get a disaster. So we'll see. It could be that people just get kicked out of office, but retain a lot of power in places like California. But I don't know. We'll see. I think this is an ongoing thing, and it's absolutely as you described it. But it wouldn't be a surprise if over the next few years, a lot of it just gets fixed by people voting one way or another for rationality.
Let's hope so. Let's hope that the voting makes enough of a difference. We recently interviewed Michael Rechtenwald, who is now in pursuing the libertarian candidacy for president of the United States. And he says one of the most important things he thinks that he can bring to this is to bring forward the discussion as a candidate so that this gets on the table and gets on people's minds, this concern about what do we want our country to look like and what are we going to do about it. That's one of the outcomes that can happen even if the election itself doesn't sway the particular person who's selected, but the fact that you're able to be out there and having that discussion can awaken and inflame a lot of valid discussion on the minds of ordinary people who still have some common sense about them. One of the gravest concerns that some of the viewers of our channel have is that a lot of this lawlessness may be by design, so that then there's a supposed justification for crackdowns of martial law and imposition of even more draconian force against the fastest force against the people of our own country. So why in the world would you have leaders, in the past 3 years encouraging police to stand down and not interfere with rioters and not arrest looters and that sort of thing? And why would you now have, if there are bailouts of these companies that have caused destruction of our real estate market that we were describing before, that's another concern about lawlessness, is that when it spreads to these massive scales, and if people who have nothing to lose it, that provides a justification for crackdowns on people's liberties even further than what we've already had. And in fact, it can be an enticement to win the psychological warfare against the people themselves, saying you don't want this kind of out of control. Obviously, the counties and the states have lost control and the cities have lost control. So now we need to have whatever it is, national or international, bring in the UN or whatever to restore some semblance of order or peace, but at the cost of freedom, due process, liberty. Look at the what's called the Patriot Act, for example. What are your thoughts about the eventuality of a loss of law and order in a society leading to increased government oppression?
Well, I think the idea that this is part of a plan, rather than some people actually believe that making shoplifting legal is okay, or letting rioters burn downtown is a good thing from a public policy standpoint. I think that's just, I guess, it's true in some cases, but it's really hard to believe it. But it's much easier to believe that some really smart, evil people are running a long-term plan that involves basically destroying the preconceptions of our culture. In other words, a lot of the stuff that's going on now gets to the heart of what we thought of as America in the past. And if you break those things, if we raise a generation of kids who don't have any conception of what freedom of speech or freedom of religion means, and don't respect private property, and don't respect contracts or any of that. If we raise a generation of kids who are that way, and we kind of are right now, then society collapses, because there's nothing. Institutions don't work unless people who are running them and who are affected by them believe in the tenets of those institutions. In other words, the courts are there and are respected because we believe judges should be impartial, and we believe the judiciary should be a separate branch of government that isn't controlled by the other branches. Now, if you bring up a generation of people who doesn't care or understand any of that about the judges, then that whole thing just falls apart. We lose what used to be the protection of the Constitution. Yeah, so that could be one of the plans. And again, I think it's self-correcting, though, as long as we've got states that have separate governments and that people can move to. As long as we have freedom of mobility and separate elections for governors across the country, that I think this works itself out, because it's basically a terrible plan for a state to implement these policies. And unless you can lock your people into that state, they're going to leave you. And so that prevents these ideas from taking over the whole government. Like, what are the odds of Biden getting reelected with open borders and the unequal application of law? I think if we had the election today, it's highly unlikely that whoever he was running against, he would beat, because so many people see what's going on and they're very frustrated. And so then it comes to the next stage of that would be, well, we're just going to steal the election and we're going to keep the guys in power. That's not out of the question either. This is going to be the most closely watched election maybe in human history, just because everybody believes the other side is cheating, and they're going to do everything they can to keep them from getting away with it. So that might result, just kind of by default, because nobody can get away with cheating, it might result in a halfway fair and free election, in which case I think the guys in charge today are going to be in big trouble. So again, we'll see, time will tell, but I'm guardedly optimistic about the next administration coming in and wanting to correct a lot of this stuff, because it's all really easily corrected. You just shut the border down for 10 years while we digest what has happened in the last few years. And the next time there's, mass shoplifting, you just taser the shoplifters, cart them off, and put them in prison. That has to happen 2 or 3 times before everybody gets the message. Same thing with rioters and looters. You apply consequences across the board to everyone who does it, and eventually everybody learns that they shouldn't do it. So we can get back to what we used to think of as normality, and it can happen in just a few years. So I'm holding out hope on my own that it does happen, but we'll see. It might be that the guys who want to prevent a return to normality or normalcy have to get so blatant in their attempts to stop the process of going back to normal that we see them, even the people who aren't paying attention, see them for what they are. So I think there's a decent chance that happens,
And to see those things for what they are rather than what they call themselves, which there's a lot of distortion of language and calling things that they aren't, that have been flying around in Washington and in entertainment and education recently. But just reverting back to what you were talking about, what the fiber of our country in its founding, what it required in order to be successful, and it was a shining example of perhaps the most free and fair representative republic that's ever been existed on the face of the earth. John Adams said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And another one was from James Madison wrote that our Constitution requires, quote, "sufficient virtue among men for self-government," etc. So there seems to be another concerted effort to corrode the capacity for logic and historical awareness, etc., in our education system. Again, these are government schools that most people are being educated at or miseducated at. And again, our guest Alex Newman has talked to us about the importance of parents taking primary responsibility, making sure that their children are aware, as well as John Whitehead from the Rutherford Institute that we've had on, making sure that parents are aware, making sure that parents help their children to learn and to be aware of how to listen, how to understand, how to communicate, how to debate based on sound logic and not just on sound bites of emotional rhetoric, so that they won't be subject to that miseducation in the public school or to homeschool if they so are able to pull it off. My wife and I homeschooled our 5 children, and great to see them in many cases starting to follow suit with that as well with our grandchildren. Any thoughts that you have about beyond optimism and voting with our feet on moving from states that are infringing on freedoms and are not upholding the rule of law to states that are standing up for freedom and are upholding the rule of law, which are things you already mentioned? Any other actions that you think that ordinary people can and should take to perhaps redress some of the wrongs we've perpetrated against our next 2 generations that are going to follow us and make sure that we leave the world a better place than we found it?
Well, yeah, let's talk about education, because I think an interesting thing is going on there right now, because especially during the pandemic, parents started to figure out what it was their kids were being taught. And in a lot of cases, they're just appalled by it. So they showed up at school board meetings, and made a lot of noise. And there was a whole subgenre of YouTube videos of school board meetings where parents were getting up and reading the hardcore porn books that are in the libraries for 11-year-olds, things like that. And I think what these crazy teachers unions have figured out is that for every teacher, there's like 50 parents. And once the parents decide that they don't like the way schools are working, they can easily clear out the school board and elect themselves as the new school board and change all the rules. So I think, again, this is one of those self-correcting things where democracy does work. And we're seeing that all over the country, where school boards are being thrown out and replaced by people who have completely different attitudes. And I think once that genie's out of the bottle, once parents figure out that it's possible for them to see how their kids are being taught and to actually affect how their kids are being taught, that's never going to go away. We as parents have discovered we have a lot more power than we thought we did, and that the people we've handed our kids off to are in some cases evil and in some cases just batshit crazy, And so we're not going to let them do what they want to do unobserved any longer. And I think that's going to change the school system in a big way pretty soon too. So again, anywhere there's actual democracy, we're heading in the right direction. And it's only in the places where people are being shut down, where there's no free speech or where everything is hidden so we can't find out what's going on. That's where the problems are growing. And so, in some ways we're going in the right direction. We need to focus on those other things where we're not finding out what's happening. And I think this is the kind of thing that feeds on itself. Once we experience power in one aspect of civil life, then we expect to be able to, experience power in other ways. So it wouldn't be a surprise if antitrust became a big issue going forward. And that's basically using the law to break up corporate entities that have gotten too big. And we did that after the Great Depression, or after the crash that led to the Great Depression, when there were a lot of big trusts that controlled the markets and were held responsible for the big crash in '29 and the depression that followed. We broke them up. I think that one of the things that could happen in the future, and this would be a really good political platform if somebody wanted to run on it, would be to go in and go to the big banks and say, okay, JP Morgan Chase, from now on, you are 5 smaller banks. Same thing with Citigroup. Same thing with Goldman Sachs and Pfizer. You are now 7 distinct and smaller pharmaceutical companies, and on. Defense contractors, big food, some partially, some parts of the energy market maybe. And that would bring competition back into parts of the system where there isn't much competition and would do us a lot of good. And I think somebody like Vivek Ramaswamy, or maybe even Trump, could run on a platform as part of draining the swamp. We break up a bunch of these big companies. I think I think that would win 70-30 in most free elections. And who knows? A lot of crazy political things are happening around the world. If you saw Argentina just lately, for instance. So there's no reason why things like that can't happen here.
Another thing that I will extend out there is, as you were saying, we need to come back together and not be divided as Americans, not allow the forces that be to separate us and segregate us into team red, team blue, all these different factions and subpopulations that we're being splintered into, where we're vying against each other, but realize we're Americans. And frankly, as we respect the other people in the world who have their beloved countries too. We have our beloved country. We want it to be healthy, whole, and to be a place of the rule of law. And where we want to stand against hate crime. But a lot of these events that have been playing, I guess, in misguided or twisted sympathy with things that have been going on in the Middle East, for example, for the last few months here in the U.S. have been chilling reminders of how Germany went off the rails back in the early 30s of the last century, where it becomes okay to officially condone hate crimes against a minority group or whatever. And that needs to be something that we don't allow that evil to creep into the lives of our children, because a lot of the miseducation and mismessaging and a lot of the narrative that we're being spun from some of these people who have the microphone at the highest levels is not only abandoning the rule of law, abandoning the pillars of our country, but also getting us to hate each other and hate our own history as a country, instead of coming together and standing up for true good and true right and true freedom for all. And I agree with you that when you call it democracy, I think what you mean is the voice of the people being heard, and that voice of free speech also on the internet, which also promised to provide, had the idea of freedom of speech. That's why we're here, trying to get independent voices out there. That's why you're on Substack. Just want to make sure that people realize and remember and remind their children that we are all Americans together, and not to be divided, not to let hate divide us, even in the name of how things get twisted and be told that, oh, you want to stand up for this particular group and be down on that particular group. Is not let that happen to us.
Yeah, I think the aristocracy loves it when Black people and white people are at each other's throats, and gay and straight and pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli, pro-abortion, anti-abortion. They like that, as opposed to everybody in the 99% figuring out they're all part of a class with a certain set of interests that are opposed by the interests of the 1%. And that would lead to a revolution of some sort in a heartbeat if it ever happened. If we ever all got together and saw that, okay, we have class interests. Let's start acting on those instead of our social ideas. And I think that that's what terrifies the super rich more than anything else. That the peasants will figure out that the aristocracy is basically harvesting them and has made them slaves, and they'll grab their pitchforks and head to the castle. That's there's a kind of political / financial French Revolution scenario that is terrifying to the billionaire class, and it seems like we're not that far from something like that, because populism is sort of the expression of that kind of frustration with what the rich guys are doing to the non-rich people. And you're seeing populism get very popular around the world. And in Europe, we've got 3 or 4 different countries where what they describe as the far right are taking over. But what they really are is populists who are saying, yeah, there's a handful of rich people who are screwing you over. Well, we'll get that back for you. We'll take care of those guys and get you back what was stolen from you. And that's a winning political approach. It's not necessarily a set of policies, which means it might lead to chaos, but it is something that a lot of people are open to now. And you're seeing politicians figure that out, run on that platform, and win in a lot of different places. And Trump is an example of that. He might win again by saying he's going to drain the swamp. This time he actually has to do it, though, or else people will realize he didn't really mean it. But I think the rise of populism is the real wild card out there politically, because all these social issues and stuff, and people trying to understand geopolitics, we should have a better idea of our economic interests than anything else, and that's where we're most clear. And if we can get together on that, we can make a big difference.
As long as it doesn't go through a kind of mob rule that then leaves us vulnerable to backlash of fascist smackdown. So that's going to be a challenging balance to strike as we move forward here, and being able to communicate clearly and freely is part of that. Thank you for being here as part of that. If people want to follow your work on Substack, where do they go?
I'm at rubino.substack.com, and you can sign up for free to the newsletter and see most of what I put out. And then a handful of really actionable things are behind a paywall, but everything else is free.
I've been very impressed, folks, with the level of quality and breadth both that John brings to his writing. It just keeps amazing me. So, John, thank you for doing that, and thank you for making it available to people. I think you're working for the good, and I appreciate you being here with us on Liberty and Finance.
Thanks, Dunigan.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we can let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Kaiser, my brother Elijah, or my father Dunigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.